Sit back, it's time to get groovy. Question, do you remember that movie?
Welcome back to Remember That Movie. I am the third Alejandro Rosa on IMDb.
And I am Steve Johnston, and I am not on IMDb.
This is our podcast where we look at the movies of the past with the eyes of today. And on this day, we are going back to 1988 to explore the fantasy film Willow. Before we get into the details of the film, who's in it, who made it, all of that, let's talk about, first and foremost, what is our history with this film? Steve, this is my pick, so I truly have no idea. Had you watched this film before? What is your history with this film?
I had watched this film before, and I am giggling slightly because my history with it is embarrassing because I was young. So I did not see this movie in theaters. I saw it shortly after when it came on to home video, and I don't remember if we rented it or if it was the Saturday evening movie on one of the TV stations. But I remember watching it, and I remember one scene. And that is the scene in which the young baby spits up into the face of one of the other characters. And because I was young at the time, that disgusted me, and I remembered nothing else from the movie. I'm fairly certain I watched the rest of it because the two-headed monster also rang a bell, but I didn't remember anything else.
Wow. Okay.
Please tell me that your experience with the movie was a bit better than that.
Vastly different.
Oh, fantastic.
So I would say that among the top 10 or 15 films of my childhood, Willow is right there in the middle. Willow was a film that I watched over and over and over again. I was very young. I would say I was probably 10, maybe 11.
Okay.
When I saw it. It was on TV. Yes, it was HBO. They put it on constantly, so I watched it all the time, and I loved it because it was fantasy, and there was swords, and I was obsessed with sword fighting. I remember being scared of the trolls. Very scared of the trolls. Two-headed dragon, not awesome, but the trolls were, to me, always scarier. There was just something evil about them.
The way they skittered over the walls,
it was their face.
Not terrifying, but the face, okay.
But I have not seen Willow since I was a little boy.
Okay.
And so this was actually kind of a very interesting ride because, like some of our other films, as I was watching it, it started coming back to me. And I started remembering bits and pieces. And then some things I had just forgotten or had very vague recollections. I was a little nervous about it, to be perfectly honest. Because this is such a treasured film of my childhood, I was very scared to watch it and hate it and be like, oh, wow, this is awful. Because there are some films that I watched as a child that were awful, but I thought they were great.
Yeah.
And I was afraid about this one because I didn't think this one held such a place in my heart, but it clearly does. So that's kind of my experience with Willow. If you want to destroy my childhood memories with your reaction to it, I mean, you might. But before we get to that, before we get to the reaction, I am going to tell you what I consider to be the shortest way to describe Willow to the uninitiated. Okay.
Very good.
Think of this as the back cover of the VHS tape, which I remember. I remember what it looks like.
Okay.
I got to put on my fantasy voice here as best as I can.
Oh, very good.
It's not fair. I always think for some of these it should be you because you have the best accent for it.
In a world.
Yes. So, but this one, it's a little bit more magic. So it's more like once upon a time.
Once upon a time.
Once upon a time, an evil sorceress hunts the lands for a child that a prophecy has foretold will bring her downfall. The child escapes certain death and ends up in the village of Nelwyn, where a young father named Willow is tasked with taking her away from the village, only to eventually learn her destiny and become her guardian, going on a quest that puts him and the baby, Alora Dannon, into a series of adventures involving trolls, dragons, sword fights, and magic. And I'll leave it there.
one of my very first notes was, is this the Moses story, just gender swap?
So the reference is there very clearly, which is that the midwife who smuggles the baby out puts her on a leafy raft, and then she floats down the river and is found. Yes, very Moses. I even wrote that down during my viewing. I'm like, oh, that's Moses, but okay.
Now, I would like to know a little bit about how this movie kind of came into being, because I was kind of taken aback to see Lucasfilm appear at the very beginning of the movie.
Do you know that I was exactly the same? I'm like, what is George Lucas? Where'd you come from? Interestingly enough, George Lucas is everything about Willow.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
Right.
Sorry. Yeah.
I thought you meant that in a far grander sense.
No. I meant that Willow exists because of George Lucas. George Lucas came up with the idea. George Lucas came up with the story. He is the originator of this story entirely.
Okay, I have to ask, when did he come up with this story?
According to what I read, he started coming up with this idea in 1972.
Oh, yes! Okay, the early 70s was like a sweet spot for Lucas's creativity, because that's when he did American Graffiti, that's when he came up with Radioland Murders, that's when he came up with Willow. My goodness.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Okay, so here's how it works. Lucas comes up with this idea around 1972. A story about a little person who kind of is like the hero of the tale. Fast forward 10 years, maybe 9 years.
Okay.
He's working on Return of the Jedi. He's working with a little Ewok named Wicket, who is played by Warwick Davis, who is approximately 11 years old. Did you know that? Because I didn't.
I did not know that at all.
Warwick Davis's grandmother heard on the radio that they were looking for little people performers. There was like a casting call for them.
Yeah.
For a film that was being shot, and he got cast as an Ewok in Return of the Jedi. He was originally not cast as Wicket, but something happened to the actor who had been cast, and Lucas looked at Warwick and went, that one, let's use him. I think I really like him. That began their relationship, and his involvement with Star Wars. That has pretty much continued to this day.
Fantastic.
According to what I read, he went up to Warwick's mother and said, I have an idea for a story. It's not ready yet, but I think I want him in it. And he would be like the lead of the story, but not yet. He needs to be older. And sure enough, 1982, he's in Star Wars, Return of the Jedi, and one would assume around 1987, he gets called up and says, come meet with me and my director, Ron Howard.
Another name that made me do a double take. Yeah.
Yes. Also, I did not know it was Ron Howard. And they were like, okay, we're going to do a movie and you're going to be the star. Ron Howard is in post-production for the film Cocoon. Are you familiar with Cocoon?
Yes.
Cocoon has special effects in it.
It does.
Ron Howard is doing post-production and he's at Industrial Light and Magic. And that's when Lucas says, hey, Ron, I've got an idea. And it just so happened that Ron was actually interested in doing like a fantasy film. So this worked out for both of them. That's how this movie kind of came to be. The other thing that delayed this film being made is that Lucas said he needed the technology to be better for the things he wanted to see done in the film as far as magic. He was like, we don't have the technology yet, even though he has his company. But he clearly was like, we need a couple more years to get the tech right.
Yeah.
And eventually they do. And this movie has a very famous bit about technology that we'll talk about. Studios were not keen on funding this film. Do you know why?
I hate to say it, but my guess would be that they were concerned that people would not be interested in a fantasy movie starring a little person.
You are half right.
Which half?
There had been a series of films, fantasy-esque, that had not done well at the box office, which included Krull, Dragon Slayer, Labyrinth, Legend. All of those films, even though some of them are iconic now, were box office bombs. And so studios were like, yeah, we don't want it. I don't think people are going to go. People aren't going to go to see fantasy. Clearly, we keep seeing it. This film is famous for having essentially the first, or at least one of the earliest versions of CGI. They developed advanced morphing technology, which had never been done before. What they worked on for this film, you would later see in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, Terminator 2, Star Trek 6. Their technology led to those films being able to do certain things that they could not have done without the work that Willow was done with.
Nice.
Okay, so it was produced by George Lucas. It was directed by Ron Howard. The story was by George Lucas. Ron Howard had an idea for a writer, Bob Dolman, very famous Canadian writer, wrote for SCTV, also wrote for WKRP in Cincinnati, and would eventually write the film Far and Away with Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman. So they got him in, and they got Adrian Biddle for the cinematography. What had he just recently done? The Princess Bride.
Oh, excellent.
He would actually get a Oscar and BAFTA nomination when he did the cinematography for Thelma and Louise several years later.
We've already spoken a little bit about Warwick Davis. You kind of teased me that there was additional things that might entertain me. Oh, that sentence started off so well.
Okay, so let's talk about the cast. We've already talked a little bit about Warwick Davis. He plays Willow Ufgood. He is 17 years old at the time of making this film.
That's amazing.
Looking at some of the other cast members, we have Mad Mordigan, who I remembered fondly as a child because he was the sword-wielding guy who was also funny. Two of my favorite things, swords and comedy. Played by the amazing Val Kilmer. This is, of course, our second Val Kilmer film in a row, and this is on purpose. We decided that this month would be Val Kilmer month.
There you go.
He had just done Top Gun like a couple of years prior. Elora Danan is our beautiful baby, who was played by multiple children.
Okay.
Initially, a set of twins, which makes total sense, except that the twins grew so fast that they outgrew the props that Willow had to carry her in.
Oh, no.
So they ended up getting the second assistant director's niece. She is predominantly who you see.
Okay.
They're definitely like, does anybody have a baby? And then there's another girl who they used for another bit of footage. And then when they were in New Zealand, they used a different girl for that one. So, yeah. And so that's our baby, Elora Danan. I love that baby. That baby was adorable. That baby was beautiful.
Ridiculously cute.
Joanne Whalley played Sorsha and was absolutely fantastic. I still like her in this. We have Jean Marsh playing the evil sorceress Bafmorda. I really appreciated her performance in this time around. I probably did not appreciate it as a child. I definitely do now. Do you know her?
I don't think so, but it would not surprise me if you said, oh, she was in this, and I'd go, oh, of course.
Have you ever heard of the show Upstairs, Downstairs?
Heard of, yes. Watched, no.
Well, she is the co-creator and one of the stars and ended up winning an Emmy for her performance in that show.
Oh, fantastic.
That is probably what she's most known for. We have Patricia Hayes, who played Finn Razel. Loved her.
Yes.
She graduated from RADA, Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts, like in 1928. She was in theater, film, television, radio. Fantastic. Of course, a friend of the podcast, because he has been in so many episodes now.
Yes.
We keep accidentally picking films that have Billy Barty in them.
Yay.
As the High Aldwin. And oh my gosh, I loved him then, and I love him even more now.
I didn't remember him then, but I love him too.
Yeah, I remember the character. I didn't know who Billy Barty was, but oh my God, he's great. There is another return to the podcast. General Kael has been on this podcast at least once before. Pat Roach.
Oh.
Our British wrestler turned actor from Indiana Jones, A Clockwork Orange, Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, where he played the Celtic chieftain.
Oh, okay. Yes. He was in the original Indiana Jones. He was the big burly guy who tried to box Indy on the airfield and gets propellered, if I recall correctly.
I was surprised when I was looking through the cast. To be fair, he has a mask on almost the entire film. Okay, you're going to have to help me here.
Yes. Gavin O'Herlihy.
Thank you for doing that for me. Playing Eric Thorbearer. All of that name is unspellable Because
Yes.
it sounded like he said Eric, right? But
I thought it was Eric.
it's spelled Airk.
Oh, okay.
He's the commander of the fallen kingdom of Galadorn.
He has ties to our previous episode. He is the son of Dan O'Herlihy. And Dan O'Herlihy plays the old man, the evil head of OCP.
I have lost track of our films. Our previous episode was The Saint.
Then it is I who have lost track of our films.
The one before that, you're saying?
Yes.
Yes.
In our episode of RoboCop, whenever it came out.
He's one of those faces where I have seen him in so many things. I don't think I've seen him this young.
I recognized him from, oddly enough, a British made-for-TV movie, Sharp's Eagle. It was a series of, I suppose you'd always call it a mini-series of movies starring Sean Bean, and Gavin O'Herlihy shows up as an American loyalist to Britain. So he is in the British Army, he is a captain in the British Army, but he's got this beautiful Southern accent throughout his entire performance.
What's interesting about Gavin is, in most of the things I've seen him in, he has a perfect American accent. I've never seen him with another accent. I was very shocked to be like, oh, you're Irish. Playing the Brownies, which are from Scottish folklore, I found out. They're playing Rule and Frangine. Kevin Pollak. And
Really?
Rick Overton. Yes, the one with the mouse head?
Yeah.
That's Kevin Pollak.
I did spend a lot of time going, who is that? I know who that is.
Yes. The film had the largest casting call of little people in movie history at the time, and had the largest amount of little people actors in a film at that time. Part of those were some of the characters from The Village. We have David Steinberg, who played Migosh, who I really liked. Mark Northover, who played Burglecut, who was great.
I loved him.
Phil Fondacaro, who plays Vankar, one of the fighters of The Village. He was also in Return of the Jedi.
Okay.
And weirdly famous for being in the Tales of the Crypt movie Bordello of Blood. He also was the voice of Creeper in the animated film The Black Cauldron. He's done a lot of different work.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, he's got a great voice. Last but certainly not least, because I am a fanboy for life now, of Julie Peters. Julie Peters plays Willow's wife, Kaya. Julie Peters had never acted before, and you would not know it. I thought she was so wonderful and so heartwarming as Kaya. Loved her. The Village had, I think, over 200 little people. CGI wasn't that good then, so they really did just cast as many as they could. And it shows. It feels like a real village. Where would you like to go now?
I want to start at the beginning in the Nelwyn village, in particular, the festival, because I was just drawn in. And I was particularly drawn by Mark Northover's performance. He's Burglecut. We are introduced in a prior scene, and he seems to be sort of the local bully, if you will. He's saying, I'll have your land. Not quite like that. But what I loved about his performance is that during the festival, when Willow is putting on his little magic act and doing his illusions, we cut to him in the crowd, and he is enjoying the performance. He turns to the person next to him and goes, yeah, that was really good. Yeah. I have this habit of picking up weird little details when we watch movies. That was one of them that just stood out to me, like, oh, he's actually like a well-rounded character. He's not just the local bully. He appreciates Willow in a certain sense for what he's doing. Yes, he laughs at him later on when things go awry, but still, I really liked that.
The Village felt so real. Everything felt full and rich. The festival felt amazing. People are playing games, laughing, drinking. They have a band playing, but the music that's playing under it is amazing. And I haven't talked about James Horner, who did the music for this film. His big break came in 1982. Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. The director, Nicholas Moyer, has joked about this. Is there truth to this? I'm not sure. We'll let everyone else look it up. But in interviews, he's joked that Horner was hired because they could not afford the composer for the first Star Trek. Here's your trivia, Steve. Who was the first composer for Star Trek?
Who was the first composer?
He's always on our podcast.
He is always on our podcast. Yep, it's going to be him, isn't it? Jerry Goldsmith.
That's right. Then Mayer eventually came back at some point to direct the sixth Star Trek. And at that point, he joked that now he couldn't afford Horner. So it has a different composer.
I love it. That's fantastic.
Isn't that just wonderful? Wonderful. So yes, you're right. The village is wonderful. The characters seem wonderful. Even a small character like Migosh, I was just like, he just seems so sweet, so nurturing. The High Aldwin, hilarious.
Love him.
Absolutely loved him.
I have a question because I was trying to figure this out. The High Aldwin decides that the human baby, what's the universe?
Daikini. Yeah.
The Daikini baby should be taken and returned to Daikini people.
Yes.
And they all say, okay, well, who's going to take him? Who's going to take him? And he declares, I shall consult the bones.
I love this scene, by the way.
He rolls the bones and he looks down at them and he says quietly to Willow, the bones tell me nothing. I am curious, was he letting Willow in on the secret that, no, this is all for show. There is no meaning to any of that in reality? Or did the bones actually not tell him anything in that particular instant?
I kind of took it the other way. I took it as a genuine, which made it wonderful. Because he just looks at me and goes, the bones say nothing. I don't know.
I interpreted it as him letting Willow in that, no, this is all.
I don't think so. I don't think so. But I don't know.
This is kind of silly, but I'm going to make a decision based on like his grasp of reality. Like he sees what's going on in a far better scope than anyone else in the village, which is why he turns to Willow and says, again, I think this is done quietly so that most other people can't hear. Do you care for this child? Do you have any affection for this child? And when Willow says yes, he goes, cool. Then you're the man for the job, Willow. Willow shall take him.
See, I don't disagree with you, except for one thing.
What's that?
I think he has to make a decision, and he's telling him, because you tell everybody, oh, I don't know. I can't see anything, even though I'm the High Aldwin. People freak out. So then he does, I think, use his wits. And then he starts with, do you have affection for this child?
Right.
And Willow says yes. And he goes, then it'll be you.
My thought was that he was going to do that anyway, that he was going to roll the bones and he's leaning into Willow, whom he has seen a little spark before, because Willow auditions to become his apprentice. He is given a test along with a couple other people. Everyone fails, but Willow hesitates. And the Aldwin calls him out on it later and says, hey, you were going to do one thing, but then you went with another. What's the big deal? Trust your instincts.
It's even better than that. He says, what was your first thought? And so he tells him, and he goes, that was the right answer. You need to trust yourself. Trust your instincts. Which is also kind of like, no, that was the right answer. Damn it. One thing that I loved was the fact that Willow has a family. And so when he goes on this journey, he has to say goodbye to his two beautiful children and his sweet, sweet, sweet wife, who cuts off a chunk of her hair so he can have it with him for good luck.
Yes.
Like I said, she's wonderful. I was smitten with Kaya. And just their sweetness together, it got to me. It got to me. So thought that was absolutely different and beautiful. And also, unlike, let's say, let's go for a good example. Unlike a Frodo or a Bilbo Baggins, they were independent. Like, they didn't have families. I think this is where it's interesting to me, the story of Willow, because he does have something to come back to. He has an entire family waiting for him. And so later, when he can give up the baby and then, decides to come back for it and then realizes that he has to stay with her, it's so moving to me because he turns to Migosh and says, Migosh, you have to go home. Tell my wife I love her, but I have to do this. And that carried so much weight. I guess what I'm trying to say is, in some stories, yes, the hero goes on an adventure. But in this story, the hero goes on the adventure despite the fact that what he wants is back home. There was just something sweet about that. One thing in the film that I thought was hilarious is one, of course, Mad Mortigan, Val Kilmer.
Yes.
We meet him in a cage. He starts funny the whole film. His comedy is just So wonderful. I think the second time we see him, he's dressed as a woman because he's trying to hide that he's with someone's wife.
Lug's wife.
Mad Mortigan, who is in full lady getup, trying to hide from this massive man named Lug, who then gets attracted to him in his outfit.
Yep.
One of the lines that I remembered watching it that made me laugh even harder this time, Lug is like, "Wanna breed?" Val Kilmer in his falsetto is like, "Tempting, but no."
This leads to one of another phenomenal line that I liked just because it kicks off an action sequence. The Queen's guards arrive searching for the baby, and they confront Mad Mortigan, who just antagonizes them a little to the point that one rears back to throw a punch. And he says, "Gentlemen, meet Lug," and ducks, so that the guard punches Lug right in the face and kicks off an entire bar brawl.
And then a great action sequence ensues.
Great cart and chariot chase through the woods. Oh,
there were a lot of action sequences that I really liked. I think Mad Mortigan had some of the best lines. The relationship between him and Sorsha. Sorsha is the evil sorceress's daughter. Here's what I will say about that, and tell me if you agree. I think that the love story is ridiculous between the two of them.
Yes, it is.
But I liked it because it was purposely dumb. It was just so silly that it worked for me.
As long as you take it as purposely dumb, I agree with you.
Yeah. Yes. How they become an item, hilarious.
I loved when we have the battle scene in the castle and the two-headed dragon is there, and we've got, I think, two conflicting armies at one point. And Sorsha's just standing in the middle while people are stabbing each other around her, just sort of doughy-eyed staring at Mad Mortigan.
Yes. But Sorsha doesn't have a real doughy-eyed stare. It's more of a glare.
Yeah.
It's a doughy-eyed glare, which is great. Because, again, I think they went for ridiculous, right? Middle of the battle scene, and she's like, well, well, well. And I loved it. I'm like, okay, this is dumb. The brownies smack Mad Mortigan with magic pixie dust, which makes him temporarily fall in love with Sorsha, which did lead to a, again, over-the-top, hilarious pseudo-love scene that made me laugh hysterically. And later, a little later, when they take her kind of as a hostage, and he has her on the horse, and she punches him in the throat. I am just laughing through all of this. Amazing. Just amazing. I liked it. I know it was dumb. I liked it.
Where was this movie filmed? Because I was watching the snowy mountains and like the ice caves and crevasses that they go through, and I would have said, oh, that's in Canada, because I think there's an area in northern Canada where you get formations like that have been used in other movies.
Most of it was filmed in England.
Okay.
There are some portions that were filmed in New Zealand, and I believe the waterfall scenes were filmed in California. Willow, victorious, comes home, and we'll come back to any other part, but
we're going to talk about the battle with the Queen.
When Willow returns home, the whole village is cheering him on. Then he sees his wife and doesn't care about the accolades, just runs to his wife and children. That's when, like, the waterworks started for me. I just started crying because it was so moving. Because, again, at the heart of it all, he wants to go home. He knows what he has to do, but his heart is back home. And that just got to me. But there is this great fight in the end between the evil sorceress and the good sorceress, and then Willow's in there, and they're trying to save the baby, Laura Dannon. What did you think about that?
This was the one thing in the movie that confused me, because I really couldn't figure out when it occurred what exactly happened to the evil queen. Now, I figured it out 15 minutes later after the credits had finished, when it suddenly occurred to me, oh, she spilled the cups of blood, lightning struck the table, she actually completed the ritual, but ended up banishing herself.
I'm going to pause right there.
Yep.
And I'm going to say, Steve, congratulations. Yep. Because I also didn't understand, and you just explained it to me.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
Good.
I was like, wait, what happened?
Yeah. I was like, okay. So she knocked some stuff over, and there was lightning, and then she
she's
kind of
gone?
disappeared.
That's weird.
And it, again, 15 minutes of mulling it over, and I suddenly realized, oh,
So,
she self-banished. Okay.
Ron,
Cool.
Ron, I know you're listening. A little too subtle for some of us.
Yeah. Sorry.
Took Steve 15 minutes. I still hadn't figured it out. And I've watched this movie 1,000 times.
Now, if I had one note for Ron Howard, it would be simply that there was a missed opportunity in the battle sequence at the end when Willow is fighting an animated cauldron pot thing that's on 4 legs, and he ends up just pushing it out the tower window. I was totally expecting we were going to cut to the fight, some good guys were going to get backed into the corner, and the pot was going to land on a bad guy. That did not happen, but I was kind of disappointed that it didn't.
Yeah, maybe.
The other note that I had here is, if only we knew someone who knows this castle, because the good group, good little army, is camping outside the castle gates, and they're trying to figure out how are we going to get inside. And Willow has a plan. Sorsha, who is presumably intimately familiar with all the ins and outs of the building,
Because it's her mother's castle.
she's sitting right over there. Do you think maybe you could consult with her? No, we're just going to go, okay, fair enough.
I will say 2 things about the end of the film. Number 1, I'd forgotten about this. And as it was happening, I was like, oh, that's right. The evil sorceress turns the invading army, the good guys, into pigs.
Into pigs, yes.
What the heck?
That was a sudden tonal shift for the frightening. My goodness.
Yeah, because it's not just like, oh, suddenly they're pigs. We see the transformation.
Everyone is screaming in agony as it occurs.
Yeah.
I did kind of like that the brownies turn into 2 little piglets.
Yeah. For a movie that has had so many light stuff in it and not a lot of
Yes.
dark, except I guess the time when the dragons had exploded. That was not light. I've forgotten about that. Yeah, that was messed up. Thankfully, our good sorceress was like, okay, I'll turn them back to humans very easily, and we don't see the transformation back, which was good. The other thing I was going to say was, you mentioned this, at the beginning of the film, we see that Willow wants to be a sorcerer. So he's doing illusion tricks, and it is what he uses in the end to protect Elora Danan. And I have to say, I've seen that kind of thing done before in films, and I think this one was the best that I've ever seen, because you don't really connect the two until right at the very end.
When did it occur to you? Because I had a feeling when he kind of ducked behind the table for a second.
I have to be honest, I remembered right before it happened.
Okay.
Because that's what he was going to do, so it's not as clean for me, but it was still like, this is brilliant. We introduced this at the beginning of the film, and we never reference it again.
Chekhov's magic trick.
But again, we don't harp on it. It's just a very small scene. 2 hours later, we use it again, and I thought, that's good writing.
I particularly loved the idea that all of this high sorcery is defeated by a simple party magic illusion.
Mm-hmm. All right, we're going to take a moment, and we're going to talk about Warwick Davis. This man has had an incredible career and continues to have an incredible career. He's been, as we said, active in films since he was 11. He's actually considered one of the highest grossing supporting actors of all time. Do you remember the fact that he was in the Leprechaun franchise?
Yes.
From the 90s to the early 2000s? Did you know that the first Leprechaun film is Jennifer Aniston?
No.
Yeah.
Okay.
Discovered that. And then you think, oh, he was an Ewok in Return of the Jedi. But he's continued to be in Star Wars films. Still, Phantom Menace, Force Awakens, Rogue One, Solo, The Last Jedi. He is in all of them, somewhere, playing different characters, and I find that absolutely awesome. He was Professor Flitwick in Harry Potter, and in The Deathly Hallows, he was also Griphook the Goblin, who had been played by a different actor in the prior films, but in the 2 Deathly Hallows, he played him. One of the other goblins in the Deathly Hallows is actually his wife, Samantha Burroughs. He met his wife and her father because they were in Willow. They were villagers.
Oh.
They got married 3 years later. They were married for 33 years. She passed away this last April.
Oh,
33 years together.
that's fantastic.
Saoirse and Matt Mortigan also fell in love.
Really?
Yes, they were married, I want to say 10 years or less. They met doing this film and they hit it off instantly. But anyway, Warwick Davis, in addition to doing so many different other things, television and film and theater, he founded Willow Management, which is a talent agency. He founded it with his father-in-law that specializes in representing actors under 5 feet tall. And a lot of the actors in Harry Potter and a bunch of these films, they're all represented by them. In 2004, they started representing actors over 7 feet tall,
Oh, okay.
realizing that they needed representation too.
Yeah.
He founded the Reduced Height Theater Company, which creates theatrical performances for short actors, and they even create reduced height sets so that they match.
Oh, that's cool.
He and his wife were part of the core group of people who founded the group Little People UK, which helps people with dwarfism and helps their families. And that was, I think, his wife's like big thing. Like she dedicated a chunk of her life to that. And so that's Warwick Davis. Just incredible. Let's look at how the film did in general. This film had a budget of $35 million. It ended up making $137.6 million, which is good but not great. I think Lucas was hoping it would be a huge success. It was an okay
Hang on,
success.
Hang on. 35 million budget.
Yes.
137.
Yep.
So nearly 4 times the budget, and Lucas is not happy?
I think they expected E.T. numbers,
Oh, okay.
and they didn't get them. So it was okay. It did well. And of course,
Yeah.
it did great when it went to video. That's when it really took off a little bit more, but it did okay in theaters. Reviews were mixed.
Okay.
Siskel and Ebert.
Our good friends, yeah.
Siskel and Ebert gave it 2 thumbs down.
No.
They were not fans of this film.
For the love of Pete, why?
Neither was Pauline Kael, who is a film critic. Lucas named the General Kael after Pauline Kael.
Oh, no.
Something she noticed.
Oh, no.
The double-headed dragon, the Ebersisk, named after Siskel and Ebert.
Oh,
He had some...
beef?
Lucas had a lot of issues with film critics, and film critics had a lot of issues with Lucas and his work. So, yeah. Unsurprisingly, Siskel and Ebert did not like it. I guess they didn't like one of their heads exploding.
Oh, which one do you think it was?
I don't know. One critic compared it to The Princess Bride. Like, wow, this was
Okay.
almost like The Princess Bride, but you missed the mark. Others mentioned similarities to Star Wars, to The Hobbit, Wizard of Oz.
I have to admit, I got serious Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit vibes, but I think it was dissimilar enough that that shouldn't have affected things overall, I wouldn't have thought.
It did lead to several video games. I think one of them I played. Something that I love about the internet now is that when I think I've played a game, I can just go to YouTube and look for footage of the game. And I'm like, oh, I think I totally played this.
You just got to be careful because you might end up convincing yourself that you have played something you haven't.
It's true. You're absolutely right. There were some novelization follow-ups. 34 years later, they had been talking about this for like 20 years, going back and doing a sort of sequel to Willow. And they did it. But they did it as a TV series. The TV series premiered November 30th, 2022 on Disney+. He came back to play the lead. Whole new group of people. A lot of the original actors made appearances. Kevin Pollak apparently made an appearance as his brownie character. Saoirse came back. Some of the little girls who played Elora Danan had cameos.
That's excellent.
So I thought that was really cool. Unfortunately, the show got canceled March of 2023. And then in May of 2023, Hulu and Disney Plus had a huge purge of content.
Yeah.
And from what I've heard, some of this is financial. They can write
A lot
off
of it.
some of this
Yep.
stuff. And
For tax purposes.
Willow got purged, which means it's gone. It doesn't exist. Like you can't find it anywhere legally I think is what I read.
Yep.
You'd have to look for it. I don't know if it was any good. I didn't have Disney Plus at the time, so I never watched it.
So I didn't watch it, so I wasn't sure. I kind of took the fact that it was cancelled fairly quickly, that perhaps it did not live up to the expectations.
Yeah.
It really does infuriate me, though, that it was a victim of the purge.
Yeah. I think it's the definitely what we're all learning is the one downside to streaming. It's amazing that you can access all these shows or movies until they decide otherwise.
Only at the whim of the company.
Yes.
When they decide you don't get things anymore, you don't get things anymore.
I had a coworker tell me that she feels like Peacock did really well because Netflix stopped carrying The Office and Peacock picked it up, and a bunch of people subscribed to Peacock because they had The Office.
Right.
Just fascinating to me. Okay, what did you think about the film? As someone who barely remembered it, clearly only saw it once.
Yeah, saw it once, had no desire to rewatch it. Two things I will say. Number one, young me was an idiot. Second thing I will say, the final note in my book here is just wonderful. This movie was so fun. It was such a fun and entertaining ride. I was trying to put this into words, but I greatly appreciated the fact that we have a fantasy story where it is like end of the world sort of stuff going on that we're trying to prevent by saving this child. And yet there is comedy thrown all over the place. The characters are so likable. The characters are so lifelike. This was a wonderful movie.
The last week or two has been like just personally like really hard. You know, I've been struggling a little. I sat down to watch Willow. I was tired. I was like, oh God, I better be able to focus on this because I have to take notes and this is my movie, so I'd better know it, you know? And also I was a little scared. I was a little scared to rewatch this film. I was genuinely afraid it was going to not be good. Childhood me would be like, no, you're ruining my childhood. What happened instead is that I was unbelievably moved by the film. It made me laugh so much and made me so happy. If you want something that is just pure fun with great comedy and just fun adventure, this is the movie for you. But the other thing that it did that I think is sometimes the core of why we're doing this podcast, when we revisit some of these films that we haven't seen, it kind of opens up the back files where these memories live. I remembered the music, just like I did with Robin Hood. The music just started popping into my head. It's like it was pre-recorded, but I didn't know where the play button was. And the moment it started, I was like, oh, I know this. I know this. I know this music. I know these lines. And the other thing that was really touching for me personally was not only did I remember the film, I remembered feeling the joy as a little boy watching the movie and just loving it and being scared of the trolls and loving Mad Mortigan and wanting to be Mad Mortigan and the magic and the everything. And it was just wonderful. There is a quote. It is by Mike Clark, who wrote in USA Today. The film is probably too much for young children and possibly too much of the same for cynics. But any 6 to 13-year-old who sees this may be bitten by the movie bug for life. And I think he was right, at least with me. I loved it then. I love it just as much now.
I agree with you.
Yes! As usual, it's available on streaming.
If you happen to have a Disney Plus subscription, it is currently on that service for free.
Until they throw it away, like the bastards that they are. Unless they want to sponsor us, and then yay, Disney Plus. Anyway, Steve, I pass you the mighty wand.
The mighty movie baton.
The mighty mighty movie baton.
Well, I feel that I am going to put myself into the same boat that you put yourself in with this movie, in that I remember it vividly from my childhood. It holds a very special place, like, in my heart, and I want you to come back and experience it with me. In honor of the 75th anniversary of its original release, we are going to be watching 1949's classic noir, The Third Man.
Folks, thank you so much for listening to us go on and on about Willow. Please like, subscribe, leave a review, leave a suggestion. All of it helps so that more people get interested in our podcast and we can keep doing it because it makes us happy and it gets us to hang out and it gets us to talk to you. So thank you so much. And we'll see you next time.
Sit back, it's time to get groovy. Question, do you remember that movie?